Hi, this is Pat Colstead. I'm back on.
Hi, Pat. Just getting ready to start the meeting. Councilmember Mahan on?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, everyone, just getting set up here.
Councilmember Kolstad, if I could ask you to mute your line for us.
Okie dokie.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this special council meeting to order. Could you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for our statement of values? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As we gather this evening, we humbly seek blessings upon this meeting. May we act with the strength and courage and the will to perform our obligations and duties to our people with justice for all. Let us seek wisdom so that we may act in the best interest of our people, our neighbors, and our country. All this we ask so that we may serve our community with fairness and respect, putting the needs before all.
Thank you. Please be seated. We have some feedback here.
It's them.
Okay, the first item we have is public presentations.
I'm sorry, Mayor, may I do the roll
Oh, yes,
call?
please. I'm so sorry.
Councilmember Mahan,
Here.
O'Neill,
Present.
Davis, Watanabe, Kolstad,
Here.
and Mayor Gilmore.
Oh,
And
here.
Mayor, if I may, please read the Statement of Behavioral Standards. The City of Santa Clara has adopted a code of ethics and values and behavioral standards for public meetings to promote and maintain the highest levels of conduct. This includes mutual respect, robust discussion, and allowing city business to be done in an efficient and consistent manner. Please note that as the presiding officer, the mayor's direction in matters of process and decorum should be followed, and that use of the gavel indicates all conversations must conclude and everyone in attendance should come to order and attention. Welcome, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you, City Clerk. So now we're on to public presentations. Is there any member of the public wishing to speak on any items? And City Clerk, do we have any cards?
No, Mayor.
For any items? Any item that's not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, the first order of business we have is a public hearing, general business, is the presentation of community research survey results and draft ballot questions for potential 2018 November ballot revenue opportunities. City Manager.
Good evening. Before we get started with the consultant's report, I just wanted to add a little bit of context in terms of the purpose of why we're here and a large factor of why the council directed that we look at revenue opportunities. So for context, of course, as you've seen this before, our budget that we have annually through various sources of funds is an annual operating budget of about $1.3 billion. Here's a quick summary of the budget actions that you recently took to put the operating budget into place, as well as the two-year capital budget, including a 5-year capital program. We had carry forwards for multi-year projects, as well as we provided enterprise funds and a lot of other details relative to our reserves. Here's the status of our reserves, just so that as we talk about operating expenditures, we also look at the reserves that we're setting aside. We are scheduled for the, from last closeout of the previous fiscal year to this closeout of our last fiscal year to likely put nearly $77 million into reserve. The diagram is a little dated in that we recently drew down from our land use reserve for purchase of the north-south parcel, and so we'll adjust that as we go forward. But we have, the city has been well underway with putting dollars aside appropriately for future one-time funds, expenditures. Here was the previous 5-year financial plan that the city put forward. And if you look at the numbers, you'll see the most recent number that we remedied was the 8.6 million through more rigorous budget review, as well as a change of assumptions and refinement of assumptions. We were able to get that down to about $1 million. And we also took out the 5-year financial plan to a 10-year review so that the council had a better understanding of what our long-term budget forecast looked like. I think what's important to share here is while we were able to get the projected deficit at 8.6 down to $1 million, while it's remarkable work, it also indicates that we likely have exhausted our internal adjustments and administrative budgetary refinements and practices for purposes of bringing down the projected deficit without having an impact to services. There's more work that we can do by studying efficiencies and looking at new business processes or modern processes through the use of technology. But we do feel that some of the older budget actions that administration can take have been utilized and that we're starting to really get down to what's actual or not. There are some changes to these charts in that this doesn't show any potential revenue coming from rent for the City Place project, which we'll build in for the next year. And it also doesn't show some recent actions which may have the opportunity to bring in sales tax through internet sales and some change practices that will gather trend information and make the appropriate adjustments. So both are good news from generating revenue, but it doesn't cure in the long term what problem we're trying to solve. So this is the chart that I just wanted to make the comment around sales tax, where it might tick up a little bit. We're estimating between 1 to 2 million. It is still very much on a downward trend, and so it may just hold flat for a period of time. So with that, we're just ending here with the annual operating budget for reference, and I'll hand it over to the consultants for a presentation of the revenue opportunities work.
Thank you, City Manager. Good evening.
Good evening, Council. Thank you so much, City Manager Santana, and
That one. Okay.
I'll try to make it behave.
Okay.
Thank you, staff, for having us here this evening, and members of the public. My name is Ross Militich. I am an associate with the Lou Edwards Group and a colleague of Catherine Liu. It's very good to be back in the city, and I am pleased to be going over some of the results of a survey that we recently conducted about the city's potential November revenue measures. So, as the council is aware, EMC and Lou Edwards Group are commissioned to conduct and analyze a survey for likely November 2018 voters about specific funding priorities for the city, as well as potential resident views on a November revenue measure. Is that any better? Can folks hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So consistent with our best practices, we tested, and at council direction as well, we tested 2 specific funding mechanisms. In this case, a commercial cannabis activities tax, as well as a potential public infrastructure bond at the $200 million level. As a piece of news for the city, contrary to what we were expecting last time we gave a presentation on these revenue measures, the California Business Roundtable initiative that would have been on the ballot for November 2018 has been withdrawn to the immense relief of most of the cities that we work with. And that means that we will no longer be facing, for general purpose measures, a 2/3 requirement for passage. And in this case, the commercial cannabis activities tax will only require a simple majority of 50% plus 1 in order to be enacted. So the survey had some pretty good news for the city, and the long and the short of it is that a commercial cannabis activities tax is viable at the simple majority threshold needed to pass under current law. But unfortunately, based on our rigorous survey, it looks like that at this time, the public infrastructure bond is not viable at the 2/3 level. Now, viable in this case simply means that it is not, it does not have approval above the 2/3 level and outside of the margin of error, where by contrast, the commercial cannabis activities tax does have that level of viability. So as a result, we would recommend that the city continue planning for a commercial cannabis activities tax for November of 2018, being as it is viable, and the bond measure should be set aside for the moment, potentially waiting until there is a bit more favorable climate for the council to act and place that measure on the ballot, potentially in 2020 as well. And with that, I will turn this over to my colleague, Ruth Bernstein, to go through in a very methodical fashion how the survey works and what the results showed for the city.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ross. Hi, I'm Ruth Bernstein with EMC Research. And our firm conducted the poll, and I'm just going to take you through the numbers. And of course, I'm available to answer questions. We also did the focus groups as well. So first, we did a phone survey that it was conducted in mid-June, so the very current data. We did 400 interviews, and we did multilingual so that we could try to reach a good representative sample of your population. And then we followed that up with 2 focus groups on the evening of June 28th. We'll talk a little about both of those. So overall, I think we've seen this in other research we've presented here to the council. Your voters are pretty positive, thinking just overall about attitudes about the city. 63% say things in the city are going in the right direction, 26% off on the wrong track, so overall feeling very optimistic. And then when we ask specifically about the city government, we also see positive ratings. So your overall job rating, the job the government is doing, 64% positive, 32% negative, really a great number, as I think we've presented to you before on other work. The job the city of Santa Clara does focusing on the priorities that matter most to residents, positive 52%. Compared to 42% on more critical. And then the job Santa Clara is doing using tax dollars responsibly, we do see a net positive, and you should know that that's really pretty phenomenal. A lot of government agencies don't see a net positive on that number, so it's a very good news. And then we did ask about their perception of need for money. Now this is a very broad, do you think the city of Santa Clara has a great need for additional funding? Some need a little or no real need for money. And we do find this is actually a pretty good mirror of how people ultimately kind of respond to revenue increases for an agency. So we see here that 65% overall think that there's at least some need, not a high level of awareness on the intensity. So 16% great need, 49% some, 24% not aware of a need. And the key number here is that some measures only need 50% to pass, some measures need 2/3, and so you can see it's short of the 2/3. So then we did ask about potential measures. We asked about 2, and we asked a question that could appear exactly on the ballot, and this one is compliant with the AB 195 and includes the tax rate statement for the bond. So it's a bond that would fund libraries and public safety and an energy efficient community rec swim center, all of these great things, but we see that voters are a majority like it and pretty excited about it, 54% definite yes, another 4% lean toward voting yes for a total of 58, and 34% no. So it is a majority, but it is short of the 2/3 that it would need for approval. Just a quick note on the demographics. We've got a bunch of demographics here, but what you can see quickly is that the blue, the total support, it's fairly consistent actually across the city. Even your Democratic Republican difference is not huge. So Democrats at 62% favor, Republicans at 50%. Usually we see a much bigger difference. Your high propensity and low propensity voters on the next page, your homeowners and renters almost identical at 58% support. So the good news here is that it's pretty consistent, that you've got a majority almost across the city saying this sounds good, but we also see that it's short of 2/3 pretty much everywhere. So we've got ground to make up everywhere. It's somehow nice that it's consistent, but it's also not at the level that you would need in order to get approval. We do see that those with young children are the most positive, maybe because of libraries, parks, and swim center. Then we also asked about a cannabis tax, gross receipts on cannabis businesses, so to improve local services, including 911 response and pothole repair and library and after-school programs and all these great things. Would you support a 10% gross receipts tax on commercial cannabis and including a square footage for cultivation tax? We see here that support, again, is short of 2/3, but this measure would only need 50%, and so it gets to 62% yes, 28% no. Again, on the demographics, we see a lot of consistency here, even with all different age groups, Both, again, Democrats and Republicans, not that different in this community. On the next page, by geography, consistent support, homeowners, renters, not huge differences in attitudes about this measure. So consistently above a majority throughout the survey. Then we do give a little bit of additional information. The first, we read some of the things that could be funded by these measures, and we sort of group them together. So we said these are a set of measures. Here are some things that could be funded with those. So the idea here is not to tell you what you should or shouldn't spend the money on, but how do we talk about things in a way that connects with your community and what do they see as important. You know, not a big surprise here, 911 emergency response comes to the top. So 58% say that's extremely important, 31% somewhat important. Maintaining those response times is important. I'm on page 17, sorry. I realize you're not here. I jumped, oh yes. We had the demographics and then we got to page 17. I just realized you're not seeing it on your screen. You have paper. So after 911 response times, we also see very high level of rating of importance of repairing streets and fixing potholes, preventing cuts to the number of firefighters and police officers, maintaining city services, upgrades to fire stations, storm drain and flood infrastructure, youth and rec programs. All of those get 40% above on a 7 on a 1 to 7 scale, and a total of very high, over 75% on total importance. Some of these other things like parks and trails, improvements to the swim center, safety improvements to the swim center, and building a new swim center don't get the same level of intensity. They have much fewer saying they rate that as a 7 on a 1 to 7 scale, but we do see actually a majority rating all of those as at least somewhat important. But again, building a new swim center comes under 2/3. We then give some additional kind of information statements here, starting on page 18. Again, we see that public safety and accountability really resonate with your voters. The top here being Santa Clara Fire Department receives nearly 10,000 calls a year, a 14% increase from a decade ago. This measure will fund critical updates to our fire stations and ensure that our fire department has the tools it needs to respond to calls quickly and save lives. 47% say that's very convincing, another 39% somewhat, for a total of 86. When you dial 911, every second counts. This measure will help make sure public safety is there when you need it. Safe neighborhoods, parks, libraries, programs for children, youth, and seniors all lead to a better quality of life. This measure will help provide funds for those things. To protect Santa Clara's local funding sources, the money can't be taken away there'll be audits and oversight, and we'll make sure the money is spent correctly. You can see those all resonate very strongly. Other statements here as well are strong, maybe not quite as strong. For instance, regardless of whether one supports or opposes the use of marijuana, it is now legal in Santa Clara. The commercial cannabis activity measure would only be paid for those who sell, cultivate, and distribute commercial marijuana to raise funds for essential city services. 68%. That resonates with 68%. It will allow the city to make safety improvements and other upgrades to the rec center. The swim center is nearly 60 years old at the end of its life. It's time to fix it. We see a majority that resonates with a majority, but under 2/3. So some of the challenge here is that the swim center itself is a little bit less popular. The city's facing a budget deficit. The city's done its homework to make fiscal responsible decisions. So all of these really resonate with the community. We ask again, after they've heard additional information, we ask again about the bond measure. And you can see that we really don't get to 2/3 at all. So at the beginning of the survey at 58%, then it goes to 60. After all of the information that's been presented, it's at 51% yes, 39% no. Again, a majority, but short of 2/3. And then the cannabis measure is really consistently above 50%. 60% at the beginning, then it goes up to 69. At the end, it's 65, which is in a great place. It's a great place really to start. That's no guarantee that that's what appears on the ballot. Obviously, you want to have communication, but it's a great place to start in a poll at this time. We did, as I said, do 2 focus groups. It's hard to kind of summarize all those hours of discussion briefly, but just what we learned really is that we kind of confirmed the viability of the cannabis activity measure. Generally, we see people are pretty happy. We see it in the polling, and we see it in the room when we talk about it. They're pretty happy with the city, and they like additional improvements. They really value their quality of life in this community, and they want to make sure things stay nice. There's some people that have kind of an awareness that tax on cannabis right now is high and that there's a real challenge for businesses that are trying to enter into this space as small businesses. But really, most of them had no problem raising the tax. They didn't feel like it was going to affect them personally. They didn't feel like the business, the cannabis industry, there was any negative impact on the community, and they were generally positive about the overall tax. On the bond measure, the sitting in the room with your voters and hearing from them, it confirmed the hesitancy that we see in the poll. The ballot question is confusing to them. So, what is assessed value? What does that mean? How much is this going to cost me? The homeowners were really feeling like cost of living is a challenge. So either they felt for them it was going to be a burden, or someone else they knew that had a house, they felt like this is going to be a burden for them. So they were feeling like they focused a lot on the cost. Many people did talk about recent improvements in the city, like they talked about some great new bike lanes, improvements to parks. And so they were open to the idea that more money could bring more things, but they just didn't see, at least what they were shown in the ballot question, they didn't really see those were high priority items. So they could kind of get to understanding, oh, I see that improvement at that park, we could do that in other places as well. But wait, my park was already improved. So, they didn't quite see the plan. And because the community is so small, people feel like they would know everything that was going to happen. So they felt like they needed to kind of see more about a plan. And then, the swim center definitely has sort of some like sentimental ties for many people and appreciative ties, but and a lot of people talked about it being old and it needed to be fixed, but they just didn't see that as a high priority right now, and they really didn't have enough information about kind of what was going to happen, and many of them don't use it. So while they could be convinced, and many people could be convinced, they just kind of weren't there right then. So that's kind of what we saw, and I can answer questions. I'm going to turn it back to Ross to talk a little about next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. So, as you may have gathered, this survey has mostly positive results for the city. Your residents trust the job that you're doing. They understand that there are some specific financial needs in the city. They understand the city needs additional resources, and they have stated in very specific terms the kinds of priorities that they have for delivery of service and the kinds of project priorities that they have for the city. With that in mind, we feel very comfortable recommending that the council, should it choose to do so, continue planning to place a commercial cannabis activities measure on the ballot. Your residents clearly support it. They believe that it will fund a wide variety of services that they prioritize. And at this point, it has sufficient viability for us to make that recommendation. Unfortunately, because the bond measure does not reach that level of viability, and as you saw on the third ask, it barely reaches a simple majority of viability in the survey, we can't recommend that the city proceed with it at this time. Fortunately, your residents, as I mentioned, do have a pretty innate understanding that there are some parks and libraries and other infrastructure needs that need to be fixed. So the city is in a pretty good position to continue the conversation with your residents going into an environment that is typically more demographically friendly to bonds, such as 2020, when we will have a presidential level turnout as opposed to the gubernatorial primary election turnout. So in keeping with the city's tradition of public transparency and engagement with your community that we have seen through many months of our ongoing partnership with the city, and in keeping with our best recommendations, we are recommending that the city not only continue with planning on placing a measure on the ballot, but should you elect to do so, engage in a robust community engagement and informational process whereby you will make residents aware of what measures are going to be on the ballot, should any be placed on the ballot, through a wide variety of informational vehicles, including online measures and providing elections information, measure information, and general city service information along those lines, as well as providing frequently asked questions about the measure should voters decide to enact it, along with informational public service collaterals, and fully engage your residents in just letting them know what is going to be on the ballot in a strictly informational and non-advocacy fashion. And so here we have a brief timeline of activities that roughly lays out the steps that city staff, LEG, and council would need to take should you decide to place the commercial cannabis activities measure on the ballot. And we can begin with July 5th, where we are debriefing the council on the overall survey results. Should you elect to proceed, we will begin working with members of your staff in order to draft a ballot ordinance and a ballot question that will maintain viability. We highly recommend that you begin updating your community leaders and other opinion leaders about the steps the city is considering to place this measure on the ballot. And I would like to draw your attention to two upcoming events that we have on July 11th and on July 12th, where the PDC, led by Sean Spano, is going to be engaging the community in some facilitated community engagement meetings, just to add a little bit more texture to the views that we have already seen in these scientific surveys. And then finally, once the ballot resolution and other materials have been finalized, council would need to act on July 17th in order to formally vote to place the measure on the ballot. And that is in keeping with the city's overall schedule, as well as the county registrar's August 10th deadline for submittal of ballot materials. After that point, it's really more of an informational and educational effort whereby the city would be engaging with our firm to provide strictly nonpartisan and non-advocacy information about the measure. So we would discuss what the consequences of passage of this measure would be, as well as providing information about how people could vote should they wish to exercise their right to do so. We would recommend issuing 3 informational citywide mailings on this particular ballot measure, similar to what the city enacted for the Measure A effort and for other efforts as well as to continue updating the community on the specific measures on their ballots and providing them with information about where they could go and cast their votes should they elect to do so. And with that, that concludes our presentation, and Ruth and I are both open for any questions, should you have any.
Thank you. That was a very complete presentation. Thank you all for that. I'm going to start with the council questions. Councilmember Davis, you go first.
Okay, so question on page 17, the one that we skipped ahead on. There was a question that said maintain essential city services. What did that include? Because from your 40% up, I understand, I see it's all about emergency services, potholes, I know is a big one. El Camino Real is like everybody's favorite target. But then when you hit that next, it's protect neighborhood libraries is 27%. So what do they consider maintain essential city services? Because I know you broke it apart here, but what was that?
So in this case, we actually didn't. So we said maintain essential city services. What we were really trying to do here is mirror some of the phrases that do or might appear in a ballot question. So, you know, many voters, the information they see is the question that actually appears on their ballot.
Okay.
And so we said maintain essential city services as one of these items to see how they react to that. Obviously, you can see it resonates with them, and that likely what they're thinking about is many of the public safety items.
So public safety is the maintain the essential city services. Okay, because
I mean, we don't know exactly what they're thinking,
okay,
but given that public safety is one of the top items here.
Well, because we hear different things. When they say maintain essential services, some people go right for the senior center,
Yeah.
Some people go right for libraries. We do have the people that commute or travel, they're the pothole people. So we have like a really cross section here, and I understand the verbiage on the ballot is limited, but you're advocating as policy to basically let them or educate them as to what this would look like, that ballot statement would look like, and where this money is really funding, what it's really funding. Is that?
So this is a general tax that will go into your general fund. So one of the phrases in that case that we look at is whether just sort of general essential city services, does that resonate for people, or do they feel like they need more detail? And
Okay.
you know, what the city funds with a general tax are essential city services that to some people, and you do a lot of things. Like we could spend hours on the phone with people talking about all the things that you do. So one of the things that we're looking for here, especially with a general tax, is does the city sort of just support you maintaining what you're doing now?
Okay, because they seem to be happy with what we're doing. It's just how can we get them to buy into a bond measure to continually fund some of these things, but at least tell them what it should go to if it is general fund money. Okay, so my next question.
Yeah.
Cannabis. So you seem to have a positive reaction on that. They would like to have either a service in our city or some, you know, so they don't have to go to San Jose, because that seems to be where everybody's going. So was that
So
one
in
of
in the poll, we did not actually ask about, we didn't ask questions related to consumer use. In
Okay.
the focus groups, it did come up, and actually almost everyone in the focus group said, well, we don't have a problem taxing it because there are no cannabis businesses, was their impression. Now, I'm
Okay.
not saying they're experts or not. Their impression was there was not a lot of cannabis, there were not places to buy it here that you go to San Jose. They weren't saying, oh, and I wish there were 10 businesses here. They were just saying we don't know of any here. So they weren't negative to it. They certainly didn't feel like, oh, it's out of control, we need to stop businesses from coming here in any way.
So it was a good idea for them, for us, to put a bond measure on to have the tax, to
They were not opposed to having a tax.
Okay.
Because most of them didn't feel like they would have to pay. There were some people who felt like it would deter new businesses from coming here or make it harder for small businesses who are in the cannabis industry to come to be here. But most people did not feel that way at all.
Okay.
Councilmember Davis, this is also not unusual in terms of the steps that a city will take when they're placing a commercial activities measure on the ballot. We have seen other clients who do not currently have dispensaries operating in their city, who basically have this as a framework for a larger question about how cannabis policy is going to be determined in the city. So the council, to my understanding, can make those policy changes without necessarily putting that up to a vote for the public, but because the actual funding mechanism itself requires a vote, this enables you to basically set up a revenue structure should the council decide to do anything with cannabis in this city.
Okay, well, because at the moment, there's 2 other cities that in November will have this on their ballot. So they're setting up their tax structures, right, as we speak, okay.
Correct. We are seeing this become a much more common method by which cities raise revenue. The
Okay.
idea being that you better get it while the getting is good.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Watanabe.
Thank you. Thank you for the detail. Has quite a good detail here. I am sorry to hear about the reaction to the bond measure, but at the same time, there's part of me that's not surprised either. Did any questions come up or any discussion about other potential bond measures that might go on the ballot in November? Like the school district I know is considering, and also the Mission College.
So in the focus groups, it did not come up unprompted. So it really didn't come up. They weren't even really saying, I don't want this because I'm going to be voting on X, Y, and Z. I mean, they just felt like generally the cost of living is high, and they just didn't, because much of the question is focused on the cost, and they felt like cost of living is already high, and they just weren't over the hump of seeing the urgency of doing it. And again, the focus groups mirrored in many ways the poll results, which, you know, more than half of the people are saying, yeah, this is great. So it's not that you're at 25% support. It's that difference between, you know, a majority and getting over 2/3, and that's where the hesitancy was.
Yeah. What would, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Vice Mayor Watanabe. Just to add a little bit more detail to what Ruth said, and this may be your experience as well, but I have seen in my professional experience that having multiple ballot measures on the same ballot does not typically interfere with the viability of one or the other, provided they're not all coming from the same jurisdiction, right? So we might potentially see some viability issues if the council elected to place both the bond and the cannabis measure on the same ballot, but we would not necessarily expect to see that if, say, the Mission College District did so. If you recall back in 2016, where we had 17 different ballot measures on the statewide ballot, and the Alameda County Voter Handbook was the size of a phone book, that did not materially impact any of the measures that our firm was assisting on. Almost every single one of them passed.
Okay, thank you. That is very good information. But I mean, it's good to know that, you know, maybe now is just not the right time, but, you know, potentially, like you said, 2020 presidential election would have a different influence. And yeah, I have to say, you know, my daughter works at the, she's a lifeguard this summer. And so, so I've spent some time down at the pool, and when I pick her up from work, I'll say, "How was your day?" And she said, "Well, we didn't get very many people." And so, you know, what you're saying really is what I'm hearing from her as well. It's like our pools are not being used, and I don't know if maybe that's something to think about as well, or maybe now is just not the right time. But I think that's an interesting, you know, I'm hearing from you and what I hear from her as well. Regarding the cannabis tax, I mean, I think, you know, it makes sense. You know, people are responding because it's not in a positive way, because it's not impacting their pockets, and so so that makes sense. And I think for the items, you know, that, you know, people would support it, you know, helping, I think are, you know, they're very important issues that are impacting our city right now, especially in infrastructure. I mean, even though people won't pass and are not willing to do a bond measure, at least there's something, there would be a form of revenue that could impact infrastructure in other ways. So I think that's good information to have. And so that's all I have for now, but thank you for all the work.
Thank you. O'Neill, do you have anything? No questions. Councilmember Kolstad or Councilmember Mahan? I'm looking up in the air.
No questions here.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan? Questions or comments? Hello, Patty?
Oh, sorry, I forgot I was still on mute. Yes, I had just one question about the cost of what going forward. What would be the budget for the materials and so forth that you're suggesting that, or recommending that we do going forward? And is that money already budgeted as part of this process? And will all materials be translated into all of the languages spoken in our jurisdiction?
City Manager, do you want to answer that? Or City Clerk?
Do you want to talk about what we've budgeted?
Sure. For the budget, we have included in the estimate for the adopted budget 2 potential ballot measures in addition to the council vacancies and the special election for the city clerk. So 2 ballot measures have already been incorporated. And with regard to the translated services, yes, we would be able to translate into the same languages that we did for the Measure A, and make sure to have mailers go to all residents as well as registered voters in the city of Santa Clara. That is also included in the current adopted budget.
So you're saying that I know the cost of the elections. That wasn't my question. The cost was because our consultant is recommending 3 mailers at the city's expense. So that expense is included in the budget we approved. Is that right?
Correct. I mean, we won't know the exact dollar amounts, obviously, until we are able to actually produce the mailers themselves. But yes, there is a level of outreach and community engagement included in the budget document, budget material. Mm-hmm.
And then on the translations, those would be printed. I mean, the last Measure A, they weren't printed. They just had to go to a website and find it. So my question is the printed materials going to be done in all the languages that it should be?
So respectfully, it's very difficult to mail all of the 7 different languages to every household, and to understand what the primary language is in the household is something that we don't have the capability of getting that information. So what we do is we put for more information on the ballot measure tag on the mailer itself, but we would then have the materials available on the website, and if somebody wanted to call into the clerk's office, we could provide a hard copy.
Can we refer that to our consultant to get something in the 7 languages or whatever they are in the printed materials? Perhaps you don't translate the entire brochure or whatever it may be, but at least to have a paragraph, as you see many, many materials printed this way, where you at least have a paragraph in the languages, in the materials, not just a here's where you go to find out more.
Sure, of course.
That's my request.
Yeah, I hear the request, and that is
Because
definitely.
we've heard that. Well, I'm saying the consultants obviously have a lot of experience doing these kind of campaigns. If we can, or this outreach, I should say, we're not campaigning.
We will most certainly work with the consultants who have a lot of expertise in education and information, and work with them to maximize translation services.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Mahan. Is there any other questions, Councilmember Mahan?
No, I already had you on mute.
Oh, again. All right, thank you. All right, my comments are, thank you for this information. I think it's invaluable for us. It's clear that we have, I'm hoping we'll vote on this to move the cannabis item forward for the November election. And it's very timely since we're now developing our ordinance, and we need to get in here in the beginning. So I think it's absolutely necessary that we move ahead with that. And I'm going to concur with the consultant's recommendation on the tax for the public infrastructure. I think there's an opportunity for that, but we don't have enough time to really vet that out and to educate our public as to why we need the money for all of the items that we want to. And I think the longer it takes where we can actually engage our public and have a lot more transparency as to how we're going to use the money and what are the projects that are prioritized and the cost of them, I think the better off we're going to be in terms of educating, and then ultimately a success at the ballot box. So that gives us a little more time. We've had a lot of other issues, so we haven't had time to really prioritize this one moving forward. Also, the fact that the school district is, both school districts, Santa Clara Unified and West Valley Mission Community College District, are looking at bond measures, quite, well, at least the Unified School District, quite a large one for November. So they'll go in November, and then we'll look at 2020 for our bond measure. But I just wanted to say just a comment about the swimming pool. And I just have a little bit different experience than Vice Mayor Watanabe, because I've been to the school trying to sign my children up for swimming classes. They're all full. It's actually absolutely packed, that swim center. It's overused. Maybe the free swim in certain times are not used, but that swim center is used tremendously by hundreds and thousands of people. It's crazy. Just ask the neighbors that live near the swim center in terms of the parking and other things. But we're going to have to buy some really big Band-Aids for the swim center until we're ready, to do something, because that's an aging facility and it needs, something. It needs a lot. And so it's going to be, a little bit longer before we're able to do anything with that center. So just we're going to look to the Parks Department and others to get those recommendations ready if we're going to put this off for 2 more years, because I imagine the swim center will always be part of that. As to what level, we don't know. But I think it's time. We need to do some more homework on that part, and I'm absolutely willing to do that. I don't want to take it half-baked to the community in November either. So I think at least I'm comfortable with the cannabis tax, moving that one forward. And I know we may have some other measures on the ballot as well in terms of voting issues. So I think we'll probably have our hands full just with that. So thank you so much. Okay, now Councilmember O'Neill.
Yeah, so thank you. So listening more to the conversation and particularly like the comment about that the people perhaps tend to be okay with a cannabis tax because most of them figure they won't be paying it. And so there were originally a number of ideas, and again, I apologize that I was ill the night that they were presented, for different forms of taxes. So I know you didn't specifically really drill down on this, but like in terms of like your sense from the focus groups and the surveys, is it your feeling that maybe other types of tax, because it's not all that typical, or I don't think the people in Santa Clara have much experience with, say, the city coming to them in terms of a bond. Historically, that's been more something that school districts use, or the cities use sales taxes. So, and one of my thoughts was, were they a little thrown by the idea of the city coming, talking about a bond, and, the thought, do you think that voters are more open to other forms of taxation? Like if there had been, the kind of taxes Santa Clara doesn't have, a utility tax or a 911 tax, document tax.
We didn't talk about other forms of taxes. Like I said, the cannabis tax made, most of them thought, why not? It doesn't impact me. So that was, kind of fundamentally their approach to that. And we didn't, on the bond, I don't think they were, and I'm speaking to the focus groups, they were not unfamiliar with what a bond was, or they didn't say, why is the city coming to me? They were not confused about a bond, and they didn't, in fact, think it was odd. I think to Mayor Gilmore's point, that you just maybe need more time to educate voters about the plan, because this is really a small town, right? I mean, the people who are going to vote are active in the community. They know their community. When you say library improvements, they say, which library, what improvements? Or parks, which parks, what are you going to do there? The swim center even, what is it going to look like? What are you doing to it? So it's not this kind of conceptual where you talk about, a housing bond that's going to build some housing, or schools where people kind of get it, that they see the schools are old. I think they really feel like, I want to know more about what exactly you're talking about, because they feel like they have a lot of ownership in the community. And it's not that and in fact, they were saying, even people who had actually fairly high AV homes, that they would be willing to pay for it. I mean, they even said, oh, well, it's the right thing to do for my community. I probably would pay for it ultimately. But they needed that push over, and they needed a little more communication. And what you really need, I think, and I'm sure Ross can speak to this, you need that point, those opinion leader neighbors, to be the ones who are saying, well, of course we should support this because this is what we're going to get in X, Y, and Z. And they just didn't feel like they were there yet. Now, that being said, the focus groups, we touched on a lot of issues. We didn't spend 2 hours just talking about the bond. We didn't show them any plans. We had already seen the poll results. So we did go into it and we talked about it. But, I think it's really, they need a little more detail.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's
okay.
That was helpful. Thank you for that question. Vice Mayor Watanabe?
Quick question. There was potentially, I guess, a legislative action to change how measures would be written, bond measures would be written, and that you have to include. Has there been any change in that, or is going forward?
So my understanding is that today was the deadline for the legislature to do something, and I actually have not heard what they did.
I see.
So I don't. I'm not
Sure,
sure. I've been waiting to find out.
Short answer is no.
Okay.
We could Google it right now.
The consensus seems to be that The way it's currently iterated, AB 195 is not workable, and there needs to be some sort of legislative solution to it. Whether that would have a wide scope, so it would affect city bonds, special district bonds, as well as school bonds, or whether it would have a narrow scope and just impact school bonds, is sort of up in the air at this point. And to the best of my knowledge anyway, there hasn't been a legislative fix on this, so we're probably not going to see any action until the legislature reconvenes later on next year.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, so City Manager, what are you looking for us now? Some direction? Motion,
yes, we
action?
seek direction in terms of which ballot initiatives you'd like to bring forward. You will see the language and the related report on July 17th for the council's consideration to move forward with the November ballot on a revenue opportunity.
All right, so can I have a motion to move forward one of our ballot measures? Councilmember O'Neill?
I would like to make a motion that we provide direction to staff to take the next steps that would be required in order to place a cannabis tax on the November ballot.
Motion second. Anyone like to speak on it? Councilmember Mahan or Kolstad?
No.
Councilmember Kolstad?
No, I'm just waiting to support the motion.
Okay. So if there's any other questions or comments from the public on this item? All right, seeing none, please register your vote. And council members City Clerk?
Councilmember Mahan, may I please hear your vote?
Aye.
And Councilmember Kolstad.
Aye.
Okay, and the rest, and that passes unanimously. Thank you very much to the
Council.
consultants. We appreciate the wonderful work. We're getting to learn a lot about our city through all these polls and focus groups and everything else. So it's really good information. Thank you. Okay, so the next item we have on is the introduction of an ordinance assigning professional responsibility for the elected city clerk to the assistant city clerk and setting the salary of the elected city clerk commensurate with the stipend and benefits of council members. City Manager.
This is the introduction of the ordinance following your June 26th direction to city staff to bring forward the role of the elected mayor as well as clarification for duties for the assistant city clerk. This follows 5 different...
Elected clerk, not elected mayor. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, excuse me.
Okay. Okay, are there any questions from the council on this? Hold on a second. Seeing none, Councilmember Mahan and Councilmember Kolstad, do you have questions on this ordinance?
No.
No, ma'am.
Okay, any member of the public? Seeing none, is there a motion? Councilmember O'Neill?
I make a motion. I'd like to move that we adopt the draft ordinance regarding the change in the job description of the city clerk and setting the compensation.
The motion and a second.
I could defer to the attorney, but I just want to clarify that it's not adoption of the ordinance, it's just the introduction, and so the adoption will come back on the July 17th meeting.
Okay, sorry.
So do we take action on this? Okay, we still do.
Yes, the action is to introduce the ordinance tonight.
Oh, to introduce it, okay. So the action is to introduce the ordinance. So please register your vote.
And Councilmember Mahan, may I please hear your vote?
No.
And Councilmember Kolstad.
Yes.
Okay, and that passes on a 5-1 vote. Thank you very much on that. Reports of members and special committees. Any member of the council? Okay, seeing none, city manager, executive director reports? Okay, that leads us to our adjournment. So is there a motion to adjourn to Tuesday evening, July 10th? Motion and a second. Please register your vote.
Councilmember Mahan?
Yes.
Councilmember Kolstad?
Yes.
And that passes unanimously. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, and thank you both for joining us.